I informed my best friend about his cheating fiancée. He with his family ruined me to the ground, so I sued them all, and now they are crawling back to ask for forgiveness. Let me tell you about Danny. Not who he became in this story, who he was before it, because that part matters and I need you to have it before the rest of it lands the way it should. Danny and I met when we were 9 years old. He moved into the house 3 doors down in the middle of August and showed up at my door the next morning to ask if I wanted to ride bikes, and I said yes before he finished the sentence, because that's the kind of decision you make when you're 9, and you don't yet understand that some people are going to cost you everything, and you're going to let them anyway because you love them first. 22 years. That's how long we were friends before any of this happened. 22 years of each other's birthdays and each other's worst days and each other's questionable decisions and each other's 2 a.m. phone calls. He was the first person I called when I got engaged. He was the one who drove 4 hours the night my fiancée was diagnosed and sat with me in a hospital parking lot without saying anything because there was nothing to say. He gave the eulogy at her funeral when I couldn't stand up to do it myself. I need you to hold that. The funeral, the eulogy, keep it somewhere in your mind because it's going to come back. He was my best friend. Present tense felt appropriate for 22 years. I'm working on correcting that to past tense. It takes longer than you'd think. He met Claudia at a work conference about 3 years ago. I will try to be precise here rather than simply uncharitable, because one of the things this entire situation taught me is the difference between those two things. Precise is, she was attractive, professionally accomplished, socially fluent in the way of someone who has studied how to work a room without appearing to work it. She spoke in the kind of warm generalities that feel like intimacy until you realize she says the same things to everyone. She laughed at Danny's jokes with a specificity that made him feel like the funniest person alive. I noticed all of this in the first 20 minutes of meeting her and told myself I was being ungenerous. Uncharitable would be, I didn't like her the second I met her and my instincts were correct, and I should have said something immediately and loudly and repeatedly. But I didn't know that yet. So I told myself I was being ungenerous, and I smiled and I shook her hand and I ordered another drink. She didn't like me either. I knew that within the hour. There are people who dislike you and have the grace to keep it private, and there are people who dislike you and communicate it in a frequency that only you can hear small pauses before they respond to you. Eye contact that breaks a half second too soon. The particular smile that doesn't reach anything above the cheekbones. Claudia was the second kind. We didn't discuss it. Danny was happy. She made him happy in the specific visible way that I hadn't seen in years, not since before the difficult years, and I wasn't going to put my reading of her social micro-expressions above his actual demonstrated happiness. That felt like the right call. I wanted on record that I tried to be the good friend here. So I did what reasonable people do in this situation. I tolerated. I smiled. I attended the dinners. I made the small talk. I absorbed the little digs, the ones designed to land precisely enough to sting but vaguely enough to deny, and I filed them away, and I said nothing because she was going to be Danny's wife, and I was going to be his best man, and some things you swallow for the people you love. I got quite good at swallowing. They got engaged on a Tuesday in March, which Danny told me about over the phone, and I said the correct things with what I believe was convincing warmth, and I meant some of them. I was happy for him. Complicated feelings can coexist. I was happy for him, and I had a bad feeling I couldn't source, and I put the bad feeling in a box, and I agreed to be best man, and I meant that part completely. The engagement was 9 months long. In those 9 months I helped plan the bachelor party. I provided input on venues when Danny asked. I fielded approximately 47 texts asking me to adjudicate between competing opinions on catering, florals, and whether the reception playlist should include a song that Claudia liked, but Danny found vaguely irritating. I was, by any reasonable measure, an excellent best man. Claudia spent those 9 months finding new frequencies. It escalated in small increments. A comment about my apartment at a group dinner. It's very you, isn't it? In a minimalist way, delivered with a smile that had too many teeth in it. A remark about my job at a birthday gathering. Oh, it sounds so stable. I admire people who are comfortable with that kind of ceiling. While Danny was in the bathroom and couldn't hear it. Once, at a brunch, a passing comment about how she imagined I must find it hard to come to couples events, said with a kind of performed sympathy so thin you could see through it. And when I looked at her, she was already looking away. I said nothing, I said nothing, I said nothing. And then I found out about the affair. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I am not a dramatic person by nature, and I do not want this to read as more dramatic than it actually was. I did not hire a private investigator. I did not go through anyone's phone. I did not do anything that could be characterized as surveillance or obsession or any of the other words that were later applied to me when the story got retold by people who needed a villain. What happened was this. I have a friend, I'll call her Ren, who works in a different department at a company that Claudia has professional dealings with. Ren and I have been friends since college. We get coffee every few weeks. She's observant and she keeps her own counsel, and she told me, over an Americano on a Wednesday afternoon, that she had seen Claudia twice in the past month at a restaurant that is not near Claudia's office or home, at hours that were not lunch hours, with a man she recognized. She told me the man's name. I felt the bottom drop out of the conversation. The man's name was Richard Harlow. Richard Harlow was my boss. I want you to sit with that for a moment because I had to. My boss, not a vague acquaintance of my boss, not someone in the same professional ecosystem, my direct superior, the man who signed my performance reviews, the man I had spent 4 years building a functional, if not warm, professional relationship with, that Richard Harlow. I went home that evening and I sat with it for 2 hours, and I did what everyone always says you should do in this situation. I didn't act on the first wave of the feeling. I waited until the second wave, which was quieter and more certain, and then I made a decision about what to do next. I want to be clear, I verified it. I'm not a person who trades in second-hand information about something this serious. Ren had seen them twice. I needed more than twice. I spent 2 weeks being careful and methodical, and I came away with enough to be certain. Not photographs in the cinematic sense, but certainty. The kind that sits in your chest with the full weight of the thing it represents. Claudia was sleeping with my boss, who had connections that I was only beginning to understand the scope of. My boss, who moved in circles that Claudia was, I now realized, actively cultivating. My boss, who had a reputation for a particular kind of professional loyalty that turned out to mean, I take care of the people who are useful to me, and I make problems disappear for the people I want to keep happy. I did not know the last part yet. I was about to learn it. I told Danny on a Saturday afternoon at his apartment. I had rehearsed the conversation approximately 100 times during the 2 weeks of verifying, and I had landed on an approach that was, I believed, measured, not accusatory, not panicked. Careful in the way of someone who is about to hand a person a grenade and wants to do it gently enough that nobody's hands get blown off. I told him I needed to talk to him about something difficult. I told him I had come to him because he was my best friend and I believed he deserved to know. And then I said, and I want to be precise about my wording here because it became relevant later, I said, I don't think you should go through with the wedding without very carefully considering whether you have the full picture of who you're committing to. I did not say the word cheating. I did not say her name next to his boss's name in the same sentence. I laid it out as a concern, a serious one, sourced, verified, but framed as, think before you proceed. There is something here that needs your attention before you walk down that aisle. Danny looked at me for a long time. Then he said, what are you actually saying to me right now? I said, I'm saying I have reason to believe the picture isn't complete, and I can't in good conscience stand up there as your best man without telling you that." He said, "Claudia." I said, "Yes." He said, "You're saying something about Claudia." I said, "I am." He didn't ask me what. He sat back. He ran his hand over his face in the way he does when he's processing something he doesn't want to process. And then he said something I wasn't prepared for. He said, "You've never liked her. From the beginning, you've never liked her." I said, "That's true. It's also irrelevant to what I'm telling you." He said, "Is it?" The air in the room changed. I felt it happen. That particular shift when a conversation stops being about information and starts being about position, about who you're going to side with when it costs you something. I said, "Danny, I'm your best friend. I have been for 22 years. I'm telling you this because I love you, not because of how I feel about her." He said he needed time to think. I left his apartment. I drove home. I called Ren and told her I'd done it, and she asked how it went, and I said, "Not well." She said, "Did you think it would?" I said no, but I hoped. He called me 4 days later. Not to ask questions. To tell me that he had talked to Claudia, that she had denied everything with what he described as genuine distress, that he believed her, and that he needed me to understand the position. This put him in 2 weeks before his engagement dinner, 6 weeks before his wedding, with a best man who was apparently willing to make accusations against his fiancée based on what he characterized as circumstantial second-hand information. I said it wasn't second-hand, and it wasn't circumstantial. He said, "Then show me something concrete." I understood what he was asking, and I understood why, and I also understood that what I had, careful, verified, but not a folder of photographs, was not going to survive a room full of doubt. Not 2 weeks out. Not with Claudia in his ear the moment I hung up. Not with 22 years of friendship suddenly being reframed as 22 years of me not quite approving, not quite accepting, not quite letting him be happy. I said, "I can't show you a photograph, Danny. That's not how this works." He said, "Then I need you to drop this." Long pause, very long. He said, "Are you still going to be my best man?" I said, "Yes." Because I was. Because 22 years meant I was going to stand up there and hope I was wrong and watch out for him even while he was furious with me. That's what it means. You don't withdraw the love because the person can't hear you. The engagement dinner was held at a private room at a restaurant I won't name, 3 weeks before the wedding. 31 people. Both families, the wedding party, close friends. Long table. Good food. The kind of event designed to feel warm and celebratory and like the official beginning of something. I was seated, by Claudia's arrangement, at the far end of the table. I noticed I filed it away. I had become very good at filing. The first 2 hours were fine. I smiled. I made conversation with the people around me. I raised my glass when toasts were made. I was present and appropriate, and I was doing the thing I had committed to doing, which was be there for Danny regardless of everything else. And then Claudia started. I think she had been waiting. I think the dinner had been, in some part of her plan, designed for this. A room full of witnesses. Danny relaxed and happy and surrounded by people who already liked her. Me at the far end, isolated, already characterized as the difficult one. It started small. A comment to the table about how supportive Danny's friends had been, most of them, with a brief, pointed glance toward me that was visible to everyone near her end of the table. Laughter. Warm laughter at my expense, and nobody saying anything because nobody was sure quite what had just happened. Then a comment about groomsmen and how she'd had to really advocate for keeping the original group, because some people had expressed concerns again. The glance. And wasn't it lovely that Danny had such loyal friends, the ones who were truly happy for him? I kept eating. I kept my face still. I was a man keeping a very large thing very contained, and I was doing it successfully, and I told myself, get through the dinner. Just get through the dinner. Then she said, to the table, in the bright conversational tone of someone saying something completely innocuous. I think some men just get very attached to their single friends, don't they? It's hard when life moves on, especially if you've had, she paused, tilted her head, that smile with too many teeth, losses, that make it hard to be happy for other people. The table went quiet. Not completely, but in that particular way where 4 or 5 people have registered the same thing simultaneously and nobody knows how to respond to it. She was talking about my fiancé. My fiancé who died. My fiancé whose funeral Danny spoke at because I couldn't stand. My fiancé who Claudia had heard about in some passing retelling and had stored, apparently, for exactly this kind of moment. She was using my dead fiancé as a character note, a way of explaining my behavior, a piece of ammunition dressed in sympathetic language and deployed across a dinner table in front of 31 people, while Danny sat at the other end not quite hearing it, and the room held its breath. I put down my fork. I looked at her. She looked back with that expression, the one that says, "What? I didn't say anything wrong," and I understood in that moment that she had been waiting for this, that the whole dinner had been moving toward this, that she had calculated I would either say nothing and look small or say something and look unhinged. I said, "I'm going to tell the table something now. I want you to know I've tried not to. I tried very hard not to." I said it clearly. I said it without theater. I laid out what I had found, what I had verified, and what I had told Danny 3 weeks prior. I said that I had come to Danny privately out of respect for him, and I had been dismissed, and that I had accepted that dismissal and planned to keep my mouth shut. I said that I did not plan to keep my mouth shut any longer. I said that Claudia had been having an affair. I said with whom. I said for approximately how long based on what Wren had told me and what I had subsequently confirmed. I said that the man in question was my own professional superior, which was information I had only recently come to understand the significance of. I said this with 31 people at the table, in the private dining room of a restaurant I won't name, on a Thursday evening that nobody in that room was going to forget. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Danny was staring at me from the far end of the table. Claudia had done something very smart. She had started crying, not dramatically, quietly, in the way of someone who has rehearsed the response to exactly this scenario and landed on. Quiet distress reads as genuine, volume reads as defensive. She reached for Danny's hand. Danny said, "You need to stop." I said, "I've been trying to stop for 3 weeks, Danny." His mother said something I won't repeat. Her mother stood up from the table. 3 people I had known for 15 years were looking at me with an expression I had never seen directed at me before in my life. The expression that says, "You are the problem in this room and we have decided." I looked at Danny one more time. He was looking at the table. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair and I left. I stood in the parking lot in the cold for about 10 minutes without any particular thought, just standing, the way you stand when the inside of your head is too loud for any specific thought to form. Then I got in my car and I drove home and I did not cry, which surprised me a little. The campaign started within 48 hours. I want to use that word deliberately, campaign, because what happened was not a spontaneous reaction. It was organized. I understand that now more than I understood it then. At the time it felt like chaos. Looking back, it had structure. First came the messages, from people at the dinner, from mutual friends who had heard a version of events that had been filtered through Claudia and Danny's family. The version, as I understood it from the messages I received, was this. I had always disliked Claudia. I had tried to sabotage the relationship multiple times. I had fabricated a story about an affair out of jealousy or unresolved grief or some pathological inability to let Danny be happy. And at the engagement dinner, I had launched an unprovoked attack on Claudia specifically designed to humiliate her in front of her family. The messages ranged from concern to cold to openly hostile. An old friend of Danny's, someone I'd known peripherally for years, sent me 2 paragraphs about what kind of person would do this to a friend about to be married and whether I had any idea what damage I'd done. Danny's sister, who I had genuinely liked, sent me a single line that I won't reproduce here, but which covered the main points efficiently. I didn't respond to most of them. What would I say? The story had already been established. I was the villain. The evidence for my villainy was that I had said something nobody wanted to hear in a setting designed to make saying it look as bad as possible. I called Danny. He didn't pick up. I left a message that I spent an hour composing and said in 40 seconds, "I know you're angry. I know the timing was wrong. I need you to know I wasn't wrong about what I said. When you're ready to hear that, call me." He didn't call. Then the post started. Not from Danny. From Claudia's friends, her cousin, 2 women I had met maybe 3 times at group events. Posts that didn't name me directly but were written in that specific way of social media subtext where the lack of a name is the name. Posts about people who can't handle other people's happiness. Posts about toxic friendships that drag you down. Posts about what you find out about someone's character when your wedding approaches. I watched them appear in my feed like a slow drip of something cold. I muted. I kept mooting. I told myself this was the price of having been honest, and that the truth had a longer half-life than a social media post, and that eventually everything would settle, and the version of events that was accurate would outlast the version that was useful. I was right about that. Eventually. But there is a significant distance between eventually and now, and I was going to spend considerable time in that distance. The workplace thing happened on a Tuesday, 17 days after the engagement dinner. I was called into an HR meeting at 11 in the morning. This was not unusual on its face. I had been in HR meetings before, routine things, nothing significant. I walked in expecting whatever routine thing it was going to be. There were 2 people I didn't recognize sitting alongside the HR coordinator. They introduced themselves with the specific vagueness of people who are not going to tell you more than they have to. Something about an internal review, a complaint. The nature of the complaint was described in language so carefully and precise that I genuinely could not determine what I was being accused of. Something about conduct. Something about creating a hostile environment. Something about statements made outside the workplace that had come to the attention of. I said, "Come to the attention of whom?" The HR coordinator said that wasn't information she was in a position to share at this time. I said, "Am I being accused of something specific?" She said that they were conducting a review and asked me to remain available for the duration of it, which I understood to mean, "Don't go anywhere." I sat in a small room off the main HR office for 4 hours. 4 hours of waiting with a cup of coffee that went cold, while 2 people I didn't know reviewed something they wouldn't describe with a coordinator who kept saying things like, "I understand this is frustrating," in a tone that suggested she understood no such thing. At 3 in the afternoon, they told me I could return to my desk and that I would be contacted when the review concluded. I walked back to my desk. My colleagues didn't look at me, which means they had all looked at me extensively while I was gone. I sat down. I opened my computer. I did the rest of my work day in the specific mechanical way of someone running on the part of their brain that can still function while the rest of it is doing something else entirely. I didn't connect it immediately. That is the thing I want to say in my own defense. In the immediate aftermath, I filed the HR situation in a separate mental folder from the engagement dinner fallout. Workplace complaint filed by unknown party. Engagement dinner fallout conducted by a specific and knowable social group. Different folders. It was Ren who connected them. She came to find me 3 days later. She sat across from me at our usual coffee place and she said, with the specific directness she is known for, "Do you know who Richard Harlow knows?" I said, "I know who he is professionally." She said, "I mean socially. his network, who he moves with. I said, "Tell me." She told me. It took about 15 minutes, and by the end of it, the two folders had merged into one picture, and the picture was not a good one. Richard Harlow, my boss, Claudia's affair partner, moved in a specific professional and social circle that had tentacles into the sector I worked in. He had, it turned out, a friendship with someone on the board of the company I worked for. A friendship that was long-standing and reciprocal in the specific way that long-standing professional friendships between powerful people tend to be reciprocal. I give you something. You give me something. It doesn't have to be explicit. It just has to be understood. The HR complaint, the one made by an unnamed party, about conduct described so vaguely that it could have meant anything, had been initiated through that channel. Not by a colleague. Not by anyone at my workplace. Initiated by a connection of a man who had reason to want me discredited and silenced and professionally destabilized. Because I had named him at a dinner table. Because Claudia had told him what I'd said. Because he had a network and I had a job, and the math on that situation was not complicated. I sat across from Ren in the coffee shop, and I felt something happen inside me. Not the grief I felt in the hospital parking lot the night of the diagnosis. Not the cold distance of the engagement dinner parking lot. Something different. Something that had been building at a low frequency for 17 days and had just found its pitch. It was rage. Clean, structural, purposeful rage. The kind that doesn't make you shake. The kind that makes you very still. I said, "I'm going to need a lawyer." Ren said, "I figured." I said, "A good one." She said, "I already asked around." The depression came first, before the rage fully settled in. I want to be honest about that because I think the cleaner version of this story, the version where the protagonist just gets angry and takes action, isn't the version that actually happened. The version that actually happened had about 3 weeks in the middle where I was not doing well. Not dramatically, I kept going to work. I kept functioning. But there is a specific kind of misery that comes from having tried to do the right thing and being punished comprehensively for it. Not just by enemies, but by the person you did it for. The person you have spent 22 years being loyal to, who has not called, who has not texted anything other than a single message telling me he hoped I would reflect on my actions because the wedding was in 3 weeks, and he was giving me the opportunity to apologize and attend. He was giving me the opportunity to apologize. I read that message 4 times. I put my phone down. I thought about Danny standing up at my fiance's funeral when I couldn't. I thought about the hospital parking lot. I thought about 22 years of being someone's person. And then I thought about a woman using my dead fiancé as a piece of rhetoric at a dinner party, while the man I trusted most sat at the other end of the table and said nothing. I didn't reply to the message. I did not attend the wedding. I retained a lawyer named Sandra Park, who was referred by Ren, and who I will be grateful to for the rest of my life. She was small, precise, and spoke in sentences that were never a word longer than they needed to be. She listened to the full account over the course of 2 meetings without expression, and then told me what she thought we had, and what it would cost, and what the realistic range of outcomes looked like. We were suing for defamation, the social media posts, the coordinated campaign of character damage through mutual contacts, specific verifiable statements made about me that were false and damaging. We were suing for workplace interference, the HR complaint initiated through back channels for the purpose of professional destabilization. We were adding Richard Harlow as a defendant, his connection on the board as a secondary defendant, and Claudia's cousin, whose post had been the most specific and therefore the most legally actionable. Danny was on the list. I want to tell you I struggled with that. I want to tell you there was a long night where I sat with the decision and felt the full weight of 22 years before I put his name on the document. There was, I'm telling you there was. And then I put his name on the document, because he had sent me a message asking me to apologize, because he had access to the same information I had and had chosen, deliberately, to disbelieve it. Because he had watched what was being done to my reputation and my livelihood by his fiancée and her affair partner, and he had said nothing, and attended his wedding while I sat in my apartment and quietly came apart. Some things you do because they're right. Some things you do because you have finally, completely run out of other options. This was both. The response to being served was, I was told by Sandra, fairly typical for people who had not taken the legal situation seriously until it was in front of them. First came the backtracking. Claudia's cousin deleted her post. Several of the mutual friends who had sent hostile messages sent revised messages that were significantly more careful in tone. The two people from the HR room were suddenly very difficult to schedule meetings with. Then came the counteroffensive. Claudia and Danny retained a lawyer, a decent one, not as good as Sandra, and the initial position was aggressive, characterizing my complaint as retaliatory, pointing to the engagement dinner as evidence of a pattern of hostile behavior, attempting to introduce the history of my dislike of Claudia as evidence of motive. Sandra looked at their filing with the expression of someone reviewing a mediocre homework assignment. She said, "They're going to argue you had it out for her from the start." I said, "I know." She said, "The affair documentation is going to matter more than anything else." I said, "Good, because I have it." Richard Harlow's lawyer was considerably better than Danny and Claudia's. He was also in a structurally worse position, which is the situation no amount of good lawyering fully resolves. The workplace interference piece was the most serious of the claims, and the documentation of the connection between Harlow, his board contact, and the HR complaint was, by the time Sandra finished pulling on the threads, comprehensive. I won't walk you through the 14 months in detail because honestly, litigation in detail is tedious even when the outcome is good, and this video is already long. What I will tell you is, there were 3 sessions of mediation that resolved nothing because the defendants were not in agreement with each other about strategy, which made compromise impossible. The affair documentation, when formally introduced, changed the atmosphere of the proceedings noticeably. Claudia and Danny's lawyer shifted position twice, ending at a settlement offer that Sandra characterized as motivated by the recognition that a courtroom is worse. Richard Harlow's situation was the most serious and resolved in a way that included, among other things, his departure from the company. The board contact settled separately. The defamation claims were resolved in my favor. The financial outcomes covered my legal costs with enough left over that I could, and did, put a deposit on an apartment in a city I had been considering moving to for 3 years and had always found a reason to delay. Danny called me the week the settlement concluded. I picked up. I'm still not sure why. Possibly the same reason I picked up Marcus's call in the other story. Some need to hear what a person sounds like on the other end of the consequences. He sounded tired. The specific tired of someone who has spent 14 months in a legal situation they didn't expect, while also, I knew from the occasional mutual contact, having a marriage that was not going the way anyone publicly admitted. He said, "I don't know what to say to you." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have listened." I said, "Yes." He said, "I know that's not enough." I said, "It's not." There was a silence, the kind that used to be comfortable between us and now had a shape to it, an outline of everything that had happened, like a piece of furniture in a dark room that you know is there. He said, "Are you okay?" I thought about this question for a moment, whether he meant practically okay or in general okay or okay in the 22 years of friendship sense where okay means something specific. I said, "I'm getting there." He said, "I'm glad." I said, "I know you are," and I meant it. We didn't say anything after that for long enough that the call ended by mutual unspoken agreement. I don't know if we'll speak again. I don't feel the urgency either way that I might have expected to feel. I moved to the new city in April. Boxes and a borrowed truck and a third-floor apartment with a window that faces east and gets good morning light. I heard, through the specific osmosis of mutual contacts who couldn't quite help themselves, that the marriage lasted 11 months, that the affair, the original one, the reason for all of it, had continued through the wedding and into the first year, and had eventually come out in a way that could not be managed or repositioned or cried away at a dinner table. That Danny had found out not through anyone telling him, but through the particular inevitability of things that are happening finding a way to be found. I want to tell you, I felt something generous when I heard that. Compassion. The kind of measured sadness for a friend's pain that a 22-year friendship probably should generate even at the end of everything. Mostly what I felt was a very quiet, yes. Not vindication exactly. Vindication implies I needed them to fail to prove I was right. I didn't need that. I had a court judgment. I had a new apartment. I had Sandra Park's number in my phone for future reference, and the knowledge that I had told the truth when it mattered, even when it cost me everything that made telling it difficult. I felt yes in the simpler sense. Yes, this is how it always was going to end. Yes, the thing I saw was real. Yes, you could have listened. You didn't. And the world is a place where consequences continue to operate regardless of whether we're paying attention. He knows that now. Here is where I am. I'm in the new city, the apartment with the east-facing window. I have a job that has no Richard Harlow in it, which is a quality I did not previously understand myself to require in employment but now consider non-negotiable. I think about Danny sometimes, not with the texture of active grief that I expected, more like thinking about a country you used to live in, present in memory, real in its details, no longer home. 22 years is a long time, and the loss of it has a weight that I won't pretend doesn't exist. I think about my fiancée. I think about the fact that her name was used as a rhetorical device at a dinner party by a woman who had never met her and did not know her, and saw her death as a useful piece of information to deploy at the right moment. I think about that with a feeling I don't have a clean word for. Something between grief and fury that has its own temperature. I gave that to Sandra too, in a sense. It was part of the defamation case. The specific cruelty of the comment about her, about losses that make it hard to be happy for other people, was documented and argued and factored in. It didn't undo the comment. Nothing undoes a comment like that once it's been made in front of 31 people, but there was something in having it formally acknowledged as the cruelty it was. Something in having the court agree that yes, that was not acceptable, that was not nothing, that was something that should not have been done to a person. She deserved that much. She deserved considerably more than that, but she got that much. People ask me sometimes whether I'd do it differently, whether I'd have said something at the engagement dinner differently, or earlier, or not at all. I tell them earlier. I should have said it earlier, more directly the day I knew, not the vague think carefully before proceeding, the full sentence, the name, the context, the details. Danny might still have chosen not to believe me, but he would have been choosing based on the complete information, rather than my considered and ultimately useless diplomacy. I tried to protect him from the bluntness of the truth, because I loved him, and it cost me more time and more damage than the truth would have. That's the lesson. Not tell every truth you know immediately with no regard for consequence. The lesson is, when you have something real, say it clearly to the person who needs to hear it. Let them refuse it with full knowledge of what they're refusing. Don't make the choice for them by softening it into ambiguity. I made the choice for Danny the first time. The second time, the engagement dinner, the wrong room, the worst possible delivery, I let 31 strangers make it for him. Neither way worked. There's probably a version of this story where it worked. I haven't found it yet. I'll let you know.
Hey dear listeners, this is Talks from the Net. Thanks for listening. If you like the content, then please like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more stories. You can also find me on Spotify, Instagram, and Facebook too. See you on the next video.